Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marjorie Parker. I am the President and CEO of JobsFirst NYC. I am pleased to welcome you today to part 3 of our Adapting to the Future of Work, Transforming Systems to Advance Young Adult Economic Mobility series. The Adapting to the Future of Work event series is a signature JobsFirst hosted forum that began in 2016 to put a spotlight on the barriers young adults face in accessing economic mobility and to advance employment solutions that work, some of which you'll learn about here today. Today's conversation will focus on building a green economy in New York City. As New York City State implement plans for climate and equity, the time is now to understand and align data, policy, practice, and workforce and economic development, and to build a community of practice amongst organizations and people working in this effort for equitable access to economic opportunities in the growing green economy. Now, the impetus for this conversation today began a year ago when our partners, Green City Force, the whole program, and Nontraditional Employment for Women, many of these organizations, many of you know these organizations, approached us with a desire for an organized New York City green sector network that would align workforce agencies delivering green jobs training, employers and policymakers focus on growing the green job sector. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of skepticism around the term green jobs. Folks have questioned whether or not there are green jobs, but we hope that after today's session, that you can leave with a better understanding of the landscape of green jobs. And we're also inviting you to join a Green Sector Network roundtable discussion on October 24th. And you can learn more about that at the end of this conversation. But before I leave you this afternoon, I want to do 2 plugs here. Relevant to today's conversation was one I had this morning. There are 2 bills being collaborated on by Massachusetts and New York. Some other states are considering joining on the launch of a new WPA-style public jobs programs, similar to the FDR's WPA program. The 2 links will be in the chat. You can look that up. Now, critical to the success of any initiative like a WPA-style public jobs program in New York State is the need for a post-secondary and workforce data systems, which we do not have. Now, we just shared a report as one of the co-chairs of the Invest in Skills New York campaign with NIATAP that articulates a vision that would allow us to measure the performance of a WPA-style public jobs programs. The report is called Accounting for Success, a blueprint for measuring the performance of New York State's workforce development system. It's in the link. There's some really great recommendation in there. I encourage you to read the report. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Lisbeth Shepard, co-founder and strategic advisor, Green City Force. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you so much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who know me, I am joining today in a new capacity, and I want to start by acknowledging our new executive director at Green City Force, Tanya Gale, for her leadership in taking our organization forward. I am so thrilled to be taking part in today's event with our co-organizers as a culmination of many years of work at Green City Force on the topic that brings us together today. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Doreen Harris, Acting President and CEO of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. NYSERDA is an essential part of the green economy in New York State and in New York City, the ecosystem of the green economy. And you can read more about Doreen's distinguished career in clean energy in her bio. Thank you so much, Doreen, for agreeing to open today's event by grounding us in what is being done already on this topic by NYSERDA to build an inclusive workforce, what the challenges are, and what is at stake. With that, over to you, Doreen.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Lisbeth, and thank you to JobsFirst NYC and all of the partners for inviting me to speak today regarding these very important issues. So as described, I'm Doreen Harris. I'm the acting president and CEO of NYSERDA. It's a real pleasure to join you today to discuss a topic that is at the forefront of, I know, my thinking as a professional and so many of us across New York on the state team and beyond. So I thank you for the opportunity. These are indeed unprecedented times, as the term is used these days. I feel, and we should feel, very fortunate to have Governor Cuomo's leadership in not only managing the pandemic that we are all too familiar with, but also building our economy back to support New Yorkers who have been impacted at all levels, and ensuring at the same time that those in our most vulnerable communities who most directly feel the harmful impacts of the ongoing climate crisis and environmental degradation are not left behind and are actually included and bolstered through these efforts. So where I sit today as we begin to move toward this new normal that we are now operating within and reimagining how we do business in this world, thinking strategically about the changes we can make at a state level, we hope will create a roadmap for success for the clean energy industry and beyond around these issues. Obviously, my focus is the clean energy industry, and relevant for today's discussion. Clearly, every industry has been impacted by COVID, and the clean energy industry is certainly not alone, but the industry alone has lost nearly 17,000 jobs as a result of this pandemic. And the setbacks and challenges many are facing today have only strengthened our resolve to assist New York businesses, employees, and not only rebuilding, but attracting new companies as part of bolstering our green economy to help our state get back on its feet and reemerge stronger than ever. If I'd been providing these remarks a year ago, I would tell you about how successful the clean energy industry has been in growing jobs across our state. The jobs were growing at more than twice the rate of the overall economy at that time. And I and we are confident that we will get back on track to continue the upward trend through the creation of these clean energy jobs that we're here to talk about today. It's important to know that the clean energy market is not new. It is maturing in a way that is measurable. A great example is in 2018, the grid modernization and energy storage sector grew 5 times faster than national employment, the highest growth rate of any clean energy sector. And clean energy workers statewide enjoyed wage premiums of up to 32% for entry-level and mid-range skill levels as compared to other industries, with approximately 70% of clean energy employees receiving health care, retirement, and paid vacation benefits. So now, as we reopen our economy across the state, we will continue to align the imperative of the climate crisis with the urgency of statewide economic development efforts to ensure that clean energy will have a pivotal role in creating short and long-term job opportunities and helping local economies. So we have at our disposal what I view as an amazing climate law that was passed last year, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, that sets forth not only the most aggressive climate and clean energy goals in the nation, but also a clear commitment to ensure that these investments are used not only to spur economic growth, but also to benefit measurably disadvantaged communities, helping to create tens of thousands of new jobs and improve health and quality of life for all New Yorkers, including those who have historically been left behind. So this goal and the goals within the CLCPA are ambitious, but we have recently, over the summer, not only moved ever closer to achieving them, but they've also sent strong market signals to the industry that New York is open for business and clean energy is a tool to achieve the growth that we seek. But I think relevant for today's discussion, we need to do so in a way that is inclusive and reflective of our priorities to bring these clean energy opportunities to all New Yorkers in an equitable manner. So I know many are aware of the announcements that just keep coming from the state. Over the summer, we had what I viewed as three very major announcements across the renewables sector, the built environment, and transportation. Those all occurred over the summer and are really geared toward attracting new businesses, supporting existing businesses, and truly moving the needle on the green economy across the state. In addition, being Climate Week, and such a pleasure to join you on this week, we've had a rhythm of announcements and investments that just continue that charge moving forward. So we recognize that the magnitude of the challenges facing our economy requires new thinking and creative approaches. And we know that announcements like this, commitments like from the state and beyond, certainly provide certainty to the market that is needed to achieve those investments. So I can't emphasize enough that we see the clean energy industry being at the center of our ability to lead ourselves out of the economic recession, with a big focus on developing and training a workforce for jobs in clean energy sectors that will be critical for our economic recovery. So I would like to speak about this briefly today. I think a great example of the work we're doing in this regard is in this brand new sector of offshore wind that our state is advancing in a nation-leading way under Governor Cuomo's leadership. We are establishing a new industry for our entire nation here in New York. And as part of our Build Back, these renewable projects provide a very significant opportunity to stimulate millions of dollars of investments and create thousands of jobs while powering over 6 million homes over the next 15 years alone. So one of the solicitations I mentioned over the summer is designed to do just that. It's the largest solicitation for renewable energy ever in US history, and are expected to spur over 4,500 good paying jobs in both the short and long term. But we use in our state our buying power to bring forth investments that we seek. And by that, I mean very specific requirements for instance, the payment of prevailing wage, the negotiation of project labor agreements, and the prioritization of opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, as well as benefits coming to those living in low-income census tracts and environmental justice areas. These are all geared toward achieving the measurable goals of the CLCPA, as I described. And despite the growing demand for clean energy services across the state, we know many companies have previously expressed difficulty in hiring in order to keep pace with the growing demand for these services across all sectors. There are workforce gap challenges that we need to fill. In addition, the energy efficiency sector was one of the most hardest hit during the COVID shutdowns. So we see Governor Cuomo's commitment to $175 million in workforce development as playing a key role in helping both companies and displaced workers in this rebuilding effort. At NYSERDA alone, we have committed nearly $70 million over the next 10 years to assist these businesses with recruiting, training, upskilling, and establishing a talent pipeline to reduce business cost of attracting and hiring new workers. So some examples of our work in this regard, $60 million being invested in areas such as building operations and maintenance, high energy HVAC, advanced lighting, controls, etc., with a target of training another 25,000 workers to support energy efficiency work. And I think relevant for today's discussion, we have a number of projects with partners, such as those on today's webinar, that are training members of priority populations, including 18 to 24-year-olds, for energy efficiency jobs in New York City. And with our support, Green City Force is preparing graduates to work in a variety of energy efficiency jobs and have a basic understanding of building system operations that has just begun working with NYCHA on a pre-apprenticeship that will be offered to 50 unemployed or underemployed young adults. We also are working to prepare young people for building automation system careers through a program that introduces them to coding, electronics, and HVAC basics, focusing on marginalized young adults in high school with skill building technical training. And in a great example of a strong partnership, we worked with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center to establish an apprenticeship program with on-the-job coaching from senior level staff, leading to 12 new hires with no previous experience. In addition to our focus on training younger New Yorkers, we do anticipate that approximately 30% of the individuals trained will come from priority populations, such as individuals with disabilities, New Yorkers residing in environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, veterans, and unemployed and underemployed adults. So again, we in New York are guided by the CLCPA and its ambitious goals and our governor's leadership. It's an amazing opportunity to lead the nation in our fight against climate change, but at the same time ensuring a just and equitable transition for these individuals and communities most adversely impacted by climate change. So, as the co-chair of the Climate Action Council, established under the CLCPA, and as the co-chair of the Just Transition Working Group, which I co-chair with Commissioner Reardon of the Department of Labor, I have a direct line to ensure that all New Yorkers benefit from this transition. We are able to assist displaced workers in finding employment who are moving into the clean energy industry, and we are able to usher in a new generation of clean energy experts at the same time. So together with our partners, industry leaders, and each of you, we are ushering in a new clean energy future that is inclusive, sustainable, and mindful, with a clear vision for addressing climate change impacts and growing our green economy, while ensuring that no one is left behind. So our nation-leading climate policies will continue to drive this investment in our state. Solutions like wind and solar and efficiency and storage and beyond. We are transforming our energy economy now and for generations to come. So it's a pleasure to speak with all of you today, and I very much look forward to continuing our productive collaboration in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen.
Thank you.
We were going to have time for just one question, but I am getting the message that actually it looks like we're not going to have time, unfortunately. So I guess I just have time then, Doreen, to thank you again for joining us during this Climate Week. I know you've been on the circuit, so appreciate that you came here to talk to us about this topic. And I know that NYSERDA will be brought up many times in the conversation we have to come. So thank you again for your leadership and for the role of NYSERDA in providing the resources, setting the direction, and working with so many of us across this entire ecosystem as is needed to bring this vision to life. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and enjoy today's discussion. Thank you for having me.
That is wonderful. Thank you. So it's now my role and pleasure again to make an introduction. And this time it is Chris Collins I am going to be introducing. Chris has agreed to moderate our first panel. And I have known Chris for many years, as many of you have. For those of you who don't know Chris, you can read more about him in his bio, which is linked. Chris joined SolarOne following an impressive career as a gay rights activist and lawyer. And in these past 10 years since I've known him, has led SolarOne to be one of New York City's most prominent environmental organizations and one that is a partner to workforce development organizations across our city in the green economy space. Chris has a unique vantage, and we're delighted that he's agreed to share his thoughts and to lead the discussion with our great panel ahead, whom he will introduce. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lisbeth. I appreciate it. I'd like to welcome our panel today. First up is Greg Elcock, who is the Director of Energy Efficiency and Demand Management at Con Edison. Next, we have Ellie Kahn, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability. And last, Daphne Rose Sanchez, who's the Executive Director of Kinetic Communities. Bios for all of the presenters can be found in the public folder. Before we get started, I'd just like to have a few words. And I come to this discussion with my own organizational bias. At Solar One, we started out as an educational organization working with the Department of Education for the past 12 years on sustainability, with a particular focus on solar and energy. 3 of our signature education programs are the Solar Schools program for 100 plus schools getting solar on their buildings, our Career Clue program, which is our summer career mentoring program for 11th graders, and our solar, electrical, and soon to include construction career and technical education program for students who may not follow a college degree path. In 2012, Solar One launched and developed a workforce training program that was focused on energy efficiency, green building operations and maintenance, green construction, plumbing, and electrical. And our programs serve people coming out of the justice system, former substance users, veterans, youth, et cetera. Last year, we trained about 340 people with about an 83%, about 283 people were placed in jobs and about a 78% retention rate 8 months later. So we're pretty pleased with the way that's going. And in 2015, Solar One launched its Here Comes Solar program, a program that facilitates solar adoption in hard to serve markets by providing comprehensive technical assistance to building owners so they can identify and implement cost-effective solar projects. Our current programmatic focuses are multifamily and affordable housing, resilient solar, that's solar with battery backup, and community solar. That's a little bit about Solar One, but when I look at the green economy, I look at 3 things. First, policy. Are there policies in place at the local level that encourage the growth of the green economy? There's no question that both the state and the city have put into place policies that encourage the growth of the green economy, and they have enacted mandates to require state and businesses within the state to hit certain carbon reduction goals in the near and long term. You'll hear from our panelists in a few minutes about those mandates and their impact on the job market. The second thing I look at is I follow the money. Is the government putting money into it? Is private money following suit? The state, as you heard from NYSERDA a few minutes ago, the state has committed billions of dollars through 2025 and beyond for clean energy initiatives that are being administered by NYSERDA. And of note, while there are budgetary considerations stemming from COVID, NYSERDA's funding falls outside of the normal legislative budgetary process because of the way it's funded. At the city level, the cuts will be deeper, but the green economy touches every aspect of this administration's priorities: affordable housing, job creation, poverty, and climate. And what about the private sector? Huge amounts of private capital are flowing into electric cars, solar, wind, batteries, and storage, to name a few. Our own solar development program at Solar One has 600 buildings installed or in our pipeline, representing a $50 million in capital investment. So private money is definitely flowing in. And then the third thing to look at is what are the jobs and who has them? And how do we ensure access to them so the communities of color who've traditionally been left behind have access to them as well? Drilling down further, what's the plan for young adults and young adults of color who are entering a devastated economy with no prior work experience on their resumes, kids getting out of CTE schools? Green jobs encompasses a wide range of fields as well as jobs. And by fields, I mean things like energy, which includes solar, wind, and energy efficiency, resiliency like battery storage. It's expensive, but where solar was 10 years ago, the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project is slated to start later this year with a commitment that 30% of new hires will be from the local community. DEP's water infrastructure plan, food, transportation, and of course, parks and open space. So there's a host of different fields with a host of different jobs in them. So let's get started. I'd like to invite our guest speakers to raise their hands and indicate if they'd like to add something that another speaker says, but let's get started. So opening question for each panelist. How would you explain to someone outside the sector what your role in the green economy is? And Ellie, why don't we start with you?
Of course, and thanks, Chris, for the introduction and the wonderful keynote from Doreen Harris from NYSERDA. So many of the people on this call, if you're a workforce participant, workforce organization in the early part of this past decade, you may be a little bit burned by the idea of green jobs and this, there was a lot of investment in solar installation and things like that, and the jobs didn't materialize. I think we're in a very, very different position than we were in the early 2010s. There are very, very clear, strong policy drivers that are coming from both New York City and New York State, as Doreen Harris mentioned. So the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability, for a little context, is the agency that's responsible for helping the whole city become carbon neutral by 2050. We know this has to happen. We know that fossil fuels are on the way out, not only because this is happening in New York City, but it's happening globally. So towards carbon neutrality, we took a really big first step in 2019 with the passage of another set of laws similar to what happened at the state. Ours was called the Climate Mobilization Act, and it concerned New York City alone and sort of went above and beyond what the state is asking. New York City's buildings are actually its largest source of carbon emissions. And I think there was a question in the Q&A about sort of what's realistically going to happen in New York City versus elsewhere. And the answer is buildings. Those buildings aren't going anywhere. They have to be managed and serviced here. And so there's a real strong potential for buildings related jobs to be New York City specific. But getting back to sort of what the laws were, they basically said that buildings have to reduce their carbon in the next 10 years. There's a bunch of different kinds of ways that these laws will come into effect. Some of them are very clear in terms of the industries that are likely to grow. For example, one of the laws that passed in 2019 requires either green sort of vegetated roofs or solar on all new construction. So we know that means green roofing jobs. We know that means solar jobs. I think we estimated several thousand jobs in the next 10 years could come out of those laws. However, that one of the major laws that's going to we estimate will generate 26,000 jobs or more in the next 10 years. Buildings can comply in any way they want. Basically, they have to meet a carbon budget, and they can do that by upgrading their HVAC systems. They can do that by switching from oil or gas to electricity. They can do that by installing solar on the roof. Since they have that flexibility, we don't know exactly what those private building owners are going to do. That's not in our control. But in general, we know that we're going to need tens and thousands more skilled construction workers and building management staff, people who design buildings, who have those green skills and really understand energy in a way that it's not industry standard right now.
Greg, do you want to respond next?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So let me start first with speaking broadly from the utility perspective, right? I think we see ourselves as continuing to be that conduit, that brings some of this new clean energy to the customer on the street, right? I see our role as more of a boots on the ground. So if those of us around long enough to remember manufactured gas, we use the pipes and wires then to bring you manufactured gas. That transition over to natural gas, electricity, and we will probably be around to bring that offshore wind, to power your cell phones, televisions, and all of your, all of the appliances of now and in the future. We also, involved in some aspects of storage, electric vehicles. Some of us may be familiar with New York State's recent order on storage. Utilities are involved there. And then primarily from where I sit as head of energy efficiency, really involved with the resource acquisition piece of the energy efficiency pie, right? That is bringing our energy efficiency programs and solutions to all of our customers in our territory.
Thanks, Greg. Daphne, how would you explain to someone outside of the sector what your role in the green economy is?
So my role is to ensure that every single climate action has a just transition lens. So I'm the executive director of Kinetic Communities. We are the first minority women benefit corporation in New York City doing energy equity work. I've been working in the intersection of housing in New Yorkers and energy efficiency for the past 12 years. And so when I explain to folks what am I doing and what's my work entail is working with utilities and governments, ensuring that climate plans are being inclusive, that they are being mindful, and that they're being centered around Black and Brown communities that have been in New York City way before the energy sector existed. And what does that look like? It looks like inclusive planning and inclusive engagement with nonprofits that have been providing social services and providing housing services to their constituents for decades, lifting them up, providing them with the proper resources so that they can also contribute to our climate action. And one of the things that we strongly advocate for in this kind of intersection of energy and housing is ensuring that any solution that is put forward related to housing, it is a solution that is supporting Black and Brown communities to start developing their intergenerational wealth that has been taken away from them in the past, and ensuring that the solutions, whether they're solar, energy efficiency, air source heat pumps, and renewable technologies, that it is centered on ownership and it is centered on supporting and uplifting those communities.
And as an entrepreneur and creator of a minority women business enterprise in the green economy, what's your vantage point on what it means to build an inclusive workforce? What are the challenges and opportunities, and what's the role of public and affordable housing in the green economy?
Yeah, I would say as an MWBE, first of all, the work of green economy I always like to address is just general construction. The methodologies and the marketing is just very shiny so that folks don't realize kind of the construction aspect of it. So one of the things as an MWBE that we do is really encourage MWBEs and encourage the utilities and government to invest in translation and not literal translation from English to Spanish, but also translation of technical to plain English so that MWBEs can participate in these programs that are often designed for manufacturers and for large construction firms that are outside of the neighborhoods and the communities that need the work. As a small business, as a woman of color in this space, representation is so important. We see time and time again, frontline communities are affected by disinvestment in affordable housing. They're affected by climate change and Hurricane Sandy, and they're not actively there when the solutions are being designed. And so our role is to kind of put up that red flag and say, like, here are folks that have been here way before I was born, advocating for these communities and making sure that they are at that table that they've designed. And so it is very important to me as an MWBE to ensure that that representation is there with programs. In the aspect of affordable housing, because again of this disinvestment in Black and Brown communities, our role is ensuring that any energy efficiency projects or renewable projects that are happening in low-income communities and communities of color are packaged in a way that does not hurt those communities. And what does that mean is that we want to ensure that if we're incorporating a solution for solar, if we're incorporating a solution to do installations or put in a new boiler or put in new windows, that it's done with local contractors. It's either the super is properly trained so that they can do it themselves. A local contractor has access to rebates and grants so that there's that kind of cushion of funding to support that learning curve, and to ensure that whatever financing or loans that a homeowner or a building needs is a loan that is supportive of their financial situation, and it's not predatory, which forces them to accelerate a foreclosure on their home. And so it's very important when we're looking at affordable housing to be mindful of the intersections of financing, to be mindful of the historical disinvestment in those communities, and not accelerate something that will trigger gentrification.
Excellent. Greg, from an energy efficiency point of view, those jobs have been heralded as the low-hanging fruit of the growing green economy jobs. As director of the energy efficiency programs at Con Ed, you have a unique vantage point into that. What's at stake in building inclusivity in the workforce? What are the challenges, opportunities, and how is that part or not part of your mandate at Con Ed?
Yeah. Okay, Chris. So maybe a little bit of perspective, and then we dive into the question a little bit. So here at Con Ed, more than half of our workforce is currently made up of minorities, and 20% are women at the moment. So I want to be clear up front that we see our mission as diversity and inclusion, right? An inclusive culture, as I see it, values everyone as an important member of the working team, right? A feeling you have when those around you recognize your importance and want your contributions. We strive for our diversity numbers to be strong. Equally, we need every woman and man at Con Ed to feel respected, included, and safe to speak up. We need their new ideas and different points of view. Diversity and inclusion is how we get there. And making that a reality is part of my everyday job, from hiring decisions, to the way I manage on a day-to-day basis. With respect to being part of our mandate, and this is focusing now narrowly in on energy efficiency goals in particular. Our primary metrics are associated with resource acquisition, which is really, the reductions of electric and gas usage on our customer premises. If we look at the growth of energy efficiency achievement over the last 3 years or so, I think it has shown that when incentivized appropriately, utility is able to meet and in some cases achieve above required goals, right? So maybe viewing it through that lens, maybe there are creative ways to work with the current primary agencies with responsibility for workforce development on training and other elements needed for the green jobs of today and those that will happen in the future.
Ellie, back to you. With One NYC's continued focus on growth and sustainability and resiliency, and the Mayor's Office of Sustainability's role in that and supporting that vision, can you share any facts and figures on green economy jobs in New York City, and where are those jobs growing?
Absolutely. So it's really difficult to put a number on that because defining what a green job is a challenge, and it sort of depends who you ask. My personal opinion is that there are jobs that fit in very neatly into sort of the green jobs category. You have a solar installer, or you're doing insulation. That's very clearly a sustainability, a green initiative. But there can be green jobs in virtually every sector. We actually need that to be the case if we are going to reach our goals. And at some point, those green jobs will just be jobs. As Daphne was saying, a lot of these green jobs that we're talking about are just construction. We needed that policy lever to kind of push construction to become greener, to push more construction jobs that are specifically focused on energy and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we have some estimates in terms of specific policies that have come out and what we anticipate the number of jobs will come out of that. I think I mentioned 26,000, over 26,000 jobs came from one piece of legislation that passed in 2019. And that's only in the 2020 to 2030 period. Those are going to continue onwards because the laws continue to get more and more stringent as you approach 2050 and our carbon neutrality goal. That paired with some of the state's initiatives, I think there's a really big push. They're putting, investing very heavily in, workforce in the private sector. The city's investing very heavily within its own portfolio of buildings and properties. And those are going to drive really good union jobs that, provide stability and benefits for a large number of people, especially paired with some of the city's initiatives. I think Deputy Mayor Thompson is going to speak soon about some local hire initiatives that his team is working on, but also our MWBE goals and requirements for contracts mean that more MWBEs are going to be participating. I highlight MWBEs because sort of trying to figure out where to plug in a workforce space. Generally, what I've heard from experienced people in the workforce development field is that you have to follow the employers and see what they want to go. By investing in and fostering minority and women-owned businesses, you're inherently building more wealth in communities of color. You're building more job opportunities to people who otherwise may not have had access to those pipelines. And so there's sort of many different prongs and many different ways to assess it. I would argue that most jobs can be green jobs, and I hope by 2050, literally every job in New York City is considered a green job.
I'd like to chime in here if that's okay, Chris.
Sure.
I mean, it's so critical what Ellie says, and this is kind of the pain point, is the work that we're already doing. The work of energy efficiency is construction, right? What is an air source heat pump? It's plumbing work. What is solar? It's electrical work. What is, passive house? It's insulation. So it's general constructions, your GCs, your contractors that have been out there, and there are hundreds of approved MWBEs working in this sector, right? But because we don't associate the work of like, oh, you're a plumber, so you can do solar thermal. Oh, you're a plumber, so you can do HVAC. That kind of interrelationship in the conversation needs to change. And then another thing that I think is so critical is I just shared on one of the Q&As is one of the things that we always recommend is Rosa Gonzalez spectrum of community engagement when programs are being designed, when folks are thinking about how do you do solar, how do you do energy efficiency. Thinking about at what point you're engaging the community can also foster a positive relationship with workforce and with the success of a project, and making sure that you're just not ignoring the community and coming in and saying, we're going to put solar, this is great, and being more inclusive and saying like, what are the existing issues that you have? You might say, well, we have an HVAC contractor who's struggling because of COVID and he hasn't gotten any jobs. And we could say, okay, this is a great opportunity for you to, we'll help you get approved by the state so that you can get the rebates or the grants directly, and they can start doing building installation and be an approved energy contractor. So just really making those connections and making it transparency and like pulling off the glam, that's what's going to make us move forward and hit these goals and hit them in a way that's just for Black and Brown communities and low-income folks in the built environment and in like other sectors of efficiency and energy.
Well, I want to go to a little Q&A for a few minutes, but before I do, I just want to get your impressions about what are the kinds of things that each of you is doing, or the kinds of things that you see that will benefit youth, young adults coming into the job market. Where do you see their role and where do they fit in? I'll give that to anyone who wants to answer that.
Well, maybe I'll take a stab, Chris. We have, generally supported multiple efforts, right? From, I guess, part of this panel, Green City Force, I guess from the get-go. Many of our contractors and subcontractors that have, on their own youth employment programs. We recently did something with one of our major partners, which involved bringing in a cadre of young persons, training them up for the very specific jobs that subcontractor would have required. We supported that. We had a nice little graduation ceremony, and most of those young persons are now employed, right? And that is just one quick example, I think, of the very specific kinds of things we're doing.
Great. Ellie, how about you?
Sure. I mean, I think I'd probably kick that question back to young people because they're the ones who are sounding the alarm about the climate emergency. They're the ones who are sort of banging on the windows and doors saying, this matters, this is important, and this is existential for us. Not only in terms of our jobs and our quality of life, but just, being able to survive on this planet in the long term. So to a certain degree, I'd say foster that spirit, foster that activism, and they'll find the ways to integrate sustainability into any kind of job that they're doing. I have a lot of faith in them. They've shown, the young people right now have very much shown how dedicated they are and how creative they are to solve the climate crisis. Right. And I don't know, I would love to foster that so that we have this more racially just and socially and economically equitable New York City as part of our transition away from fossil fuels.
Daphne?
Yeah, I would also I'm not too worried. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about them is their level of entrepreneurship, is their level of creativity to addressing the inefficiencies in our world. The current way that we are getting towards climate action is not good enough, right? We need more access, we need more opportunities. And if we continue asking folks to just you have to go to school, you have to get an entry-level job, and then you can do something, that system no longer works. And so seeing the next generation coming up with their own creative ideas and really giving them that platform and saying, you know what, we've tried this route, it doesn't work. How can we support you? How can we give you the tools, the resources, the training to make sure that you can succeed with this climate action idea that you have? And really, again, being mindful of the community, because they are part of that community, and supporting them to build that wealth that was taken away from them before they were even born.
Okay, let's take a couple of questions from the audience. One from Connie Mendez and Henry C. Settlement asks, how can I engage more employers in the green economy? Do we have any thoughts on that?
So I'll let you talk about the internship program, but one of the things that I always recommend we have an energy equity fellowship program for high school students and college students. And one of the things we always strongly recommend and we'll share with them is, here are the resources of the existing establishment, who are the utilities that work in the energy space, who are the agencies that fund energy efficiency and housing. And I'll tell them to look at their listservs, to look at their approved contractor list, and to look at their news announcements for individuals that have just been awarded a multi-million-dollar contract for solar or X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, the state of New York as an authority, they do not have to comply with MWBE regulations, so they can just have one organization do work. But I still strongly encourage you to reach out to them and be very vocal about, hey, I see, congratulations, you're going to do this 6 megawatt of solar. We would love to have some of our students at least have either a chance to speak with you, have a chance to learn about it, and even the opportunity to intern or be hired for this project.
Great.
If I can add on that, so the city does have an MWBE requirement, so city projects have to have MWBEs. The other thing is, NYSERDA has really wonderful workforce grants. So if you approach a company and say, hey, I have free money for you to hire an intern, just tell me what they need to know. Tell me what kind of skills you're looking for. and what kind of candidate you're looking for. So I would plug, let's use as much of that in New York City as possible. State funds, so let's bring it back down here. But yeah, and so for example, we've done that with an internship program that the Mayor's Office of Sustainability partnered with CUNY on, and that's for STEM college students. And basically, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability is working with a lot of sort of architecture and engineering firms and consultancies that specifically deal in energy with our sort of day-to-day work. And we realized that a lot of them were recruiting from, out of city elite universities and not necessarily the local talent that we have here that's a bit more diverse as well. And so basically just talking to those employers, finding out what kind of skills they wanted to have in a candidate, connecting them to those internship funds so that they can reduce the financial burden and the potential risk of bringing on an intern. And then you create this sort of pipeline of students who are predominantly people of color, very high proportions of immigrants and first generation, primarily lower income than many of the other colleges that people had been recruiting from. And that at least gets people in the door and sort of creates new relationships that will last into the future.
That's great. Greg, I have a little different take on that. What are the supply chain opportunities to support that kind of effort?
Yeah, sure. Well, very specifically, we have a supply diversity group here at Culhane that, and if you can't measure it, you can't know what is happening, right? So they have very specific metrics for engagement around WEs, subcontractors, and the whole spectrum. And that I think is an interesting way to begin to get involved directly in some of these green jobs and green economy initiatives, at least specifically with our company. What I just wanted to go back to the question before. What I like to say is that I start with me. What I mean by that is happy to go out, talk to students, talk to high schools, talk to these organizations, and as well as via our strategic partnerships group. We also have been, supporting a number of these green initiatives, and we have skewed specifically towards green economy and the green initiative opportunities. So, just putting that out.
That's so very, very important. We do that a lot with Con Ed and other companies around the city who come in and help to mentor a lot of the students in high school and CTE program. It's a great thing to open up people's eyes to think about what they can do. I guess one other one is another question's come in, and then I'm mindful that we have to start to wrap up here. How has COVID affected the enforcement of local law mandates that you referred to, Ellie?
So we're in the middle of a crisis right now, but it's a nested crisis. It's a crisis within a crisis, which is that larger climate crisis. We can't lose sight, and so we are absolutely moving forward with local law 97, which is the one I believe that you are referring to, the law, and we can't lose sight of that.
Yep, and we can't lose sight of the fact that the work we're talking about is critically important because it affects not just job creation, but also its livelihood. It results in more food security, more rent security, all sorts of stuff that ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what this is really kind of all about. Let's do a quick lightning round because I know we're running out of time. We only have a couple of minutes left. For each of you, what's the one thing that everyone joining this event that they can do this week to tilt the future towards social and economic inclusion for young adults in the green economy?
I would just, in a lightning round, I would say, keep and stay informed about what's happening. There's too many times, I've had conversations with multiple organizations and, the opportunity has passed. We have not looked at what's happening with state policy. And some of the easiest ways to inform yourself is to keep abreast of what is happening.
Ellie?
I'd absolutely agree with Greg on that one. There's some good resources out there. Some in sort of jargon, some in more plain language. I'll drop the names of a couple, but there's plenty more besides the ones that are coming to mind right now. There's Urban Green Council, and they have a lot of information about laws that are coming up, different drivers of industry and workforce. And then there's Building Energy Exchange, which has a lot of resources on its website and is a good place to learn more about what's going on in this field. Staying informed is essential. I think in terms of what you can do this week, we have the Mayor's Office of Sustainability has a handy set of actions that you can choose from for Climate Week. If you follow them on any sort of social media platform, it's at GREENYC, so GreenYC with one N. And there's a suite of options that you can choose that specifically focus on climate justice.
Great. Daphne?
I would just say kind of a two-pronged approach. One on like the larger scheme is just investment in youth so that they can have that opportunity and then access. A lot of times the energy sector is like, you should come to us and ask us, but feel comfortable in telling us we need to go to you and we need to spend time in your classrooms or spending time in the evenings and in weekends in whatever language that you need it, because the reality is that climate change affects everyone, and it further affects frontline communities and BIPOC communities at a much graver, it has a much graver effect. And we want to make sure that whatever action we're doing moving forward is an action that can start providing restorative justice. And then for the week, I have a shameless plug. I will be celebrating Black, Indigenous people of color on October 7th. And so you're all welcome to join us here exclusively from folks that are in the front lines doing energy efficiency work. And like, what does it mean as a BIPOC community to drive climate action? So I encourage you all to come and join us.
Yeah, that's
I'd like to make one last plug.
Okay.
You have one more week to fill out the census. So that's one major thing that you can do. It helps climate, it helps everything. So fill out your census, encourage other people to do so as well.
And vote.
And please vote.
And please vote.
And I'd just like to say, one of the things that I think we can all do, and everybody on this call can do, is just start to follow the money, see where the money is being invested, see where the job this sector is going to grow so quickly during this recovery period. NYSERDA, as I said, has billions of dollars that they're required to file chapter verse of how they want to spend that money with the Public Service Commission. They're all public documents. It's a great roadmap to look at where they're going, what they're going to be funding, the kinds of things they're going to be funding. I'm sure the city has similar things, and it's real important to sort of look at private industry and see what they're funding. And that's a great roadmap for where we can see these jobs and fields starting to grow and emerge. With that, I do want to thank all of our panelists, as well as the folks at JobsFirst for inviting us here today. I hope it was an informative and educated discussion. And I'm sure that if there are additional questions, we'll try and get answers back after the presentation.
I'm Kathleen Culhane, President of Nontraditional Employment for Women, or NEW. I want to give a huge thanks to Chris, Daphne, Greg, and Ellie for that great conversation. At NEW, we've been placing women in green economy jobs, namely careers in the skilled construction trades, the plumbers and electricians our last panel spoke of, for decades. And we would not be able to do so without great supporters working to ensure career opportunities are available for all in the green economy. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives for the City of New York, in conversation with Donnell Baird, founder and CEO of Block Power. While we're waiting on Donnell, greetings, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So I know that you and Donnell are going to have a conversation. We would love to hear a little bit from you in terms of your history with green economy jobs, what brings you to this conversation, and what you're thinking of for the immediate opportunities that I know you're so enthralled about.
Well, thank you. I first came to understand what green jobs are in 2005. I was a college professor of planning, and I was working in New Orleans on rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina with a bunch of community organizations and Catholic charities and enterprise community partners, and the AFL-CIO pension arm of the building trades called HIPBIT. And there were a lot of job opportunities on rebuilding the city, but a lot of those jobs were terrible, and they hired undocumented immigrants from Central America and didn't even provide them masks, and going into buildings with mold, and people were getting sick and literally living in abandoned cars under Interstate Highway 10 because there was no housing for them. And the AFL-CIO set up 6 job training centers to really train people and improve the quality of work in the rebuilding. And at those job training centers, the average reading and math level for adults walking into those centers was 4th grade. And the unions didn't have the capacity to do the kind of in-depth remedial basic education and training that was needed. And for me, it was a wake-up call on a lot of levels as to what's really required to do green jobs in an inclusive and just way. So that was like my introduction. In 2008, late in the summer, I was asked by the Obama transition team if I could help pull together some ideas for what they thought they were going to win. And they wanted some ideas for what they might do once they got in office. And so we went out and got a foundation grant and commissioned about 20 papers or proposals for what they should do. And the one Obama's team liked the most was retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency across the country and focusing on training inner city young people of color to do a lot of that work. So I joined with a labor leader, Jerry Hudson, who's from New York, who's now Secretary Treasurer of SEIU, with an activist academic from University of Wisconsin, Joel Rogers, and with the National Building Trades head at the time, Mark Ayers. And we created a nonprofit called Emerald Cities Collaborative to actually work on this project, very similar to what Daphne's doing now. And our agenda was what is now called the Green New Deal, essentially. And that is the need to address both bad jobs or no jobs and climate change at the same time. And the need for that has only increased since 2008.
And I see Donnell has joined us, so I'll leave you two to it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I've been on the Zoom for an hour. I'm not sure why I wasn't able to participate. Deputy Mayor Thompson, good to see you. What would you say that you've learned over the last 10 years, and how has the vision of what Emerald City is trying to bring to the fore, how has that changed, if at all? Particularly as we head into this new century, this new decade. As you may know, to be blunt, a lot of funders, a lot of folks in the foundation world, they say, look, green jobs, we've been there, we've done that, we tried it, we made investments during 2008, 2009, it didn't work out. So what's different? What are they not understanding about what the new opportunities are? How can we help them along?
I think the first thing we learned in Emerald Cities was the need for a movement building approach. We started off thinking that, if we just go in and make an argument about how people can save money on conservation, whether energy or water, that would be enough. And what we learned was that we really need to start at the very beginning of how big in scope this problem is in terms of carbon, and how if we don't make change, there are going to be bad things that are going to happen. And also on the other side, what opportunities exist if we go about it in the right way. And that just takes a lot of education. Few people understood, banks didn't understand how to finance it, didn't know how to think about it. Very few people understood how things like microgrids, if they're community owned, could become wealth generating for low income communities. If communities pair that with organizing people to conserve energy and sell energy from their microgrids to the grid, the larger grid, during peak hours in the afternoons, things like that, folks had no concept of. And without this upfront popular education, we couldn't get cities or counties or states to change policies. On the funder side or the foundation side, we were asked questions like, how many green jobs will there be? And I think that's kind of like asking how many police departments are going to retrain their officers to take a community-oriented policing approach. The answer depends on whether we keep building the movement. It's not something that can be answered in the abstract, and it's the wrong question. The question should be, how can we strengthen the movement for green jobs? How do we do that? And that will provide the pathway to an answer of how many jobs there are going to be. It's not something that industry, it's not a technical question. It's a political question. It's a question of will. It's a question of popular understanding.
How do you think that about the job standards and the credentializations? The last panel, Daphne spoke a little bit about, how credentials need to change. One of the things we've been looking at is how the relationship between energy efficiency and COVID-19 reduction in many of our buildings, right? If you open up windows and increase air circulation to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in an apartment building, you may be increasing the energy burden, but there's new technologies you can install. So now when an energy efficiency auditor does an audit of an apartment building, they need to balance this need to have fresh, clean air, where the COVID-19 may be removed and not be circulated by the building's HVAC system, with the energy efficiency. And so, you would have this worker who's been trained on not only energy efficiency analysis, but also public health and COVID-19 mitigation strategies. How do you think about the work standards and the job qualifications that are necessary as we move forward over the next 10 years? How is that changing?
I actually think that we have to elevate workforce training and development to one of the key levers in bringing about a greener economy and a healthier economy. The kind of work Chris Collins does, for example. In my own home, we bought a smart heating system that actually measures the outside temperature, and it adjusts the indoor heat and air circulation according to what's going on outside. It's not been working for the last 3 days. We've had cold showers and no heat. And the reason is because the programmer who programmed the system didn't contemplate swings in cold air at night and heat during the day that we're experiencing now. That's related to climate change. And so the system breaks down because of the external shock, essentially, of temperatures due to climate change. And the key is actually having programmers who are trained and having workers, plumbers, who are trained. And the same goes for home care workers who take care of elderly people in their house. They need to be trained to understand all about indoor quality, air quality, as well. And the contractors who come into the house have to be trained both on health and energy in order to actually maximize health and maximize savings at the same time. As I know that's the kind of work you do, but it requires really critical education, I call it. And that is training people at a high level, at all levels, on how to actually think about complexity, how to actually build systems that take into account, unforeseen events.
Yep.
So to me, it's a thoroughgoing challenge that we have that goes from DOE to CUNY to our colleges to our workforce training programs and so on.
And I think it's such an exciting opportunity for Green City Force alum to be able to have those jobs and to own the small businesses that are gonna, actually implement these green infrastructure and smart home and smart building upgrades challenges. So not just to be employees, but to be owners of their own minority women-owned businesses that do this work. And so when you look at large policy initiatives which you've led at the New York City government, such as community hire, the recent project labor agreements, how you all are thinking about the Climate Mobilization Act at City Hall, how do you see the intersection of these new kinds of jobs that you're talking about with these massive policies that the New York City government and the de Blasio administration has led?
Well, we think that the energy sector presents opportunities. The green sector presents opportunities, in part because it's not already established and you don't have like 50 entrenched, organizations, dug in and fighting you every step of the way because they've been doing it their way for 100 years and they don't want to change. So in one sense, we have an opportunity to actually make the economy more fair and equitable, the green economy from Jump Street. But in our recent project labor agreement, we took on established industry in construction, and the building trades voluntarily agreed that 30% of all construction work be done by residents of high poverty zip codes or NYCHA. And we think this ought to be the policy, not just for construction jobs, but for all city contracts. And we're pushing for state legislation, a community hire act that would enable that. In construction alone, that means 24,000 job opportunities for people in these neighborhoods in the next 4 years. If we get the legislation, it can be a lot more than that. And we think that green jobs ought to be done this way, but it's just a general way of thinking. We can leverage the buying power, contracting power of city and state government to literally eliminate poverty. And that is something the green jobs effort just makes visible for everybody. We can do this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an extraordinary vision that you and the mayor have outlined to potentially, dramatically reduce or even eliminate poverty in New York City. And, New Yorkers are ambitious, and this is certainly an ambitious goal. I think my last quick question is not an easy one, it's a hard one, which is what do you think is the hardest element of the green jobs vision? Like, what is the most complicated and most difficult to achieve component of implementing this green jobs vision, whether it's from a policy standpoint, a financing standpoint, an employment standpoint? What do you think where do you think the biggest challenge is? And then we'll move to an audience question if we have time.
I think the biggest challenge is actually imagination and creativity. One of the reasons I so like you and I like people like Ellie and I love Daphne, even though I don't know them, is because you all are bringing new ideas to the table. And we need that. New York City has 520 miles of coastline, more coastline than all the major cities on the West Coast and the East Coast combined. 2/3 of the world live in coastal cities, all of whom are threatened by sea level rise. So New York City could become the center for research, the center for business development on how coastal cities adapt to rising sea levels, and that can employ untold numbers of people. But we have to have the imagination to see ourselves as leading that way. And the same goes for our 900,000 buildings that need to be retrofitted. We are big enough to actually set the standards for what building maintenance software looks like. And we can actually build the supply chains right here in the city, because we are so big, we can actually force industry to follow our standards, things like that. We have New York has tidal power in our water that's passing through us all the time. We are not tapping that. We could become the Center for Research and Deployment of Tidal Energy. There's so many things we can do, but we need the imagination to actually do it. And we have one of the most diverse populations on earth, people who speak every language, who understand every culture. So we literally can be the hub for the whole world, where anyone can come and speak in your language and connect with people who can connect back with you to talk about how to solve problems in your country. That is how we need to view our population. Diversity is not a burden. It is actually something that's an asset for our city, but we have to start seeing ourselves that way and seeing our population that way. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Well, that is an incredibly inspirational call to action for all of us, and in particular, Green City Force alum who can become central actors in this vision. Deputy Mayor, we want to thank you for your time. We know you're incredibly busy in the
Can I say one more thing?
Overlapping crises, and go ahead.
To me, this is how we solve the racial wealth gap. It is not by begging white people for reparations. It is actually through envisioning a different future and then acting on it.
That's right. That's right. No, incredibly important. So look, we'll collect questions and comments and thoughts from everyone and make sure that we get them to the Deputy Mayor and his team. Deputy Mayor, we want to thank you for your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Mitchell. I am the Executive Director of the HOPE program. Donnell, thank you so much for leading the conversation. A big fan of Black Power. And Deputy Mayor Thompson, it is always inspirational to hear your thoughts and your vision. So thank you. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our next panel, Sadia Sherman. I've been Executive Director of the HOPE program for 9 years, and I remember first meeting Sadia when she was the Senior Zone Coordinator for NYCHA's REASE programs. And here we are 9 years later, and she is Executive Vice President of Community Engagement and Partnership at NYCHA, and also got the prestigious honor of being tapped to be the Executive Director of the New York City Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity. And that's a big job right now. Basically, they're tasked with making sure that the impact of COVID that disproportionately was on low-income communities of color, that as part of the recovery, there's inclusion and there's equity. I know one of the big initiatives this task force is working on is making sure that 600,000 New Yorkers get access to broadband internet. And so big stuff going on. Sadia, we're thrilled to have you moderating this panel. And I've been seeing lots of the questions come in, and people are really asking for what are tactical skills and what are real career paths. And so I think you have an amazing group of panelists that can share some of the answers that people are really wanting to know. So without further ado, Sadia.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. And also really, thankful to follow Deputy Mayor Thompson and always inspired by his remarks and his thinking, which is so creative. So, as Jennifer mentioned, I came to NYCHA almost 9 years ago, and I've had the privilege of working at NYCHA to connect residents to economic opportunities in a variety of capacities. So I've done all the jobs, from direct recruitment events with residents at our developments to working with employers, training providers, labor unions, as well as working across city agencies and systems. I can say with full confidence that this work is hard. It can be challenging to connect the dots between a variety of stakeholders, even when we're mutually aligned. But I also know that it's absolutely possible. And our team at NYCHA, along with our partners, and most importantly, residents, have been able to make some great things happen. But there's more to do, of course. So, at NYCHA, we serve over 500,000 New Yorkers through our conventional public housing and our Section 8 program. The majority are Black and Brown New Yorkers. Many are municipal employees and the essential workers who have kept our city running, particularly during COVID. And over 20% of our own workforce are NYCHA residents. NYCHA communities, like many communities of color, have been impacted by COVID. And having an economic recovery that is inclusive, that is equitable, is critical to the success of our city. While I oversee a division at NYCHA, I also have the honor of serving as executive director of the city's task force for racial inclusion and equity, which is co-chaired by the First Lady, Deputy Mayor Thompson, who you just heard from, and Deputy Mayor Pereira Hense. The task force was formed in late April to address the disparities that were laid bare during COVID and ensure that the city recovers in a way that is fair and equitable. While many of the task force initiatives are serving New Yorkers and communities of color broadly, we've had a specific focus on the 27 hardest hit communities. Most of the city agency leaders on the task force either come from, work in, or currently live in one of these 27 neighborhoods. And for me, it's all three. So this work is also very personal. There have been a number of task force initiatives that have ranged from expanding access to healthcare through new COVID centers of excellence to the broadband expansion, which Jennifer just mentioned, some summer programming that occurred through the task force, new mentoring and consulting services for MWBEs, and this work is ongoing. Efforts like this are only successful through collaboration. At NYCHA, we've nurtured long-standing partnerships with many of the groups you've heard from today, like Green City Forests, the HOPE program. We're also heading into the 11th year of our NYCHA Resident Training Academy, which is a partnership with Brooklyn Workforce Innovation and City Tech. And the Academy has really served as a primary vehicle to prepare residents for jobs with NYCHA and with our contractors. So, I think to Jennifer's point about like what are the mechanics of these jobs and how do people actually get them, there can sometimes be skepticism, particularly based on past experience about green jobs and whether they really hold the promise that we all seek. And we heard some of that in our earlier panel, right? This idea of what is a green job. But we know that these jobs are real. We know they're necessary if we're going to address climate change and environmental health and environmental justice. And they can be a variety of jobs, right? And there's ways in which we can increase access to green jobs and the green economy by also breaking down some of the barriers and how we define them. At NYCHA, we have our Office of Resident Economic Empowerment and Sustainability, better known as REES, which really works through multiple levels to connect the dots. So the folks in REES work on the ground with our partners and residents and frontline staff and community stakeholders. They work directly with employers, labor, and other industry partners. And then most importantly, they work within NYCHA to make sure that we're maximizing all of the levers that we have to create opportunity through our direct hiring as well as through our spending. As part of NYCHA's sustainability agenda, the authority has pushed forward a variety of new initiatives, including energy performance contracts, solar gardens, weatherization programs. Resident engagement and employment has been a foundational component of this work. It's also fostered creativity. So for example, our EPC contracts have generated resident jobs ranging from field technicians to community outreach workers. We have contractors who have developed on-the-job training opportunities to really reduce barriers to employment that can sometimes be placed through credentials or years of experience. And we also have been able to build out academic bridge programs, which have helped residents prepare for testing into some of the unions, particularly Local 3. Our preservation and new development programs also all have resident hiring requirements, have MWBE contracting requirements, and also have sustainability standards that must be met. And as we consider new ideas for how we will preserve our entire portfolio and really be able to garner new investment, jobs and contracting opportunities will be centered in this work. So we spent time this morning learning more about the sector, about the market, and this is our opportunity to dig a little deeper with folks who are carrying out this work on a day-to-day basis. I'll just close by saying that, the fight for racial justice, for racial equity is also a fight for an inclusive economy. We have an opportunity to reshape our local economy through this recovery. So it's crucial that we consider how do we best position New Yorkers for these opportunities, particularly our young New Yorkers. What are the ways that we can be intentional about making sure that people have ladders for advancement, for ownership, and how do we make sure these are good quality jobs? So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our panelists who can answer these very important questions. So I will introduce our panelists. So today we have with us is Ashley Douay, who is installation monitor at Energy Training Solutions. We have Domingo Morales, who is founder of Compost Power. And we have Allison Ziogas, who is the Labor Relations Manager at Orsted. So thank you all for being with me today. Good to see you all. So we're going to dive right in. So Domingo, I'd like to start with you. You are an expert in composting. You understand food chemistry. You're an educator, entrepreneur. It would be great for you to tell us a little bit more about Compost Power. How did you decide to start your Compost Power, and how can others follow in your footsteps and become green entrepreneurs?
Okay. Hello, everyone. So a little bit about the beginning of my journey. In 2015, I joined Green City Force. And the reason why I joined Green City Force is because I was working a lot of dead-end jobs, and I felt like there was no room for growth. I was being paid below minimum wage. So I had enough. I quit a restaurant job that I was working in 2014. And Green City Force was the first thing that I saw when I came home one day, and I looked at the elevator and there was a flyer there. And I realized that I met all of the requirements to enter this program. And it really seemed like they wanted to teach us. They wanted to invest in us. So that gave me like a welcome feeling. And I thought, I'm going to apply for this program. It's going to change my life. But I had no idea what was really going to happen. I was in that program. I learned about solar panels, energy efficiency, water conservation, composting, urban farming. I just learned everything sustainable. They had this whole umbrella of sustainability, and they taught us. And like 2 weeks after learning about stuff, we were put in the position to actually start teaching it. So student becomes the teacher, and that was sort of the cycle of how I got started. 7 months into the program, I was offered a job, or I was notified that there was a job opening at one of my training sites. And I applied as a joke. I really didn't think I was going to get the job. I thought to myself, this is going to be a good practice interview. So I'm going to do it. So I applied for the job, and I basically went to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and I told them everything I knew about composting. And I didn't have two main qualifications, college degree or a driver's license, because I'm from New York City. Most of us don't have driver's licenses. So I applied lacking the two main qualifications for that job, and I ended up getting the job because thanks to Green City Force and the training site in Red Hook, the Red Hook compost site, I qualified because I knew more about compost than any other applicant. So that was sort of the start for me. From 2015 up until recently, I was training thousands of people how to compost sustainably, how to do it hand-powered, how to do it without rats and smells and actually making your community worse. And I had a hand in training other Green City Force Corps members just like myself, which is why the job was so exciting for me. I'd be able to train people just like me, because when I entered the field, it really wasn't diverse. I would go to meetings and it would be a room full of white people. And I felt like I was playing catch up because I wasn't taught about this as a kid. So Compost Power for me, it was an idea that sparked. I wanted to start something where I'm actually going into underserved communities and actually teaching them how to build compost systems and run compost systems. But I actually want to give them the resources, the infrastructure, the signage, actually give them the resources they need to do this work. Because at my role at the Compost Project, I was teaching people, but I really wasn't responsible for building new sites. It was people coming to my site and just seeing how we did things and learning a little bit about compost. For me, I felt like it was an opportunity to turn compost into a tool to teach everybody about sustainability. And if communities have power over their own waste, that just gives them that mentality of, hey, this is a system we had no control over for the past 70, 100 years, and now we have control over it. So using compost as a tool to actually give the community power to make changes in those systems and have ownership in those systems so they can bring the community up. So that's just a little bit about compost power and where the idea came from.
That's amazing. And I really, this idea of communities having ownership and power really is important and definitely relates to some of the discussion earlier. So Ashley, I'm going to turn to you and also hear more about your experience in the sector. So can you talk a little bit about the workplace culture within the green sector? And I think Domingo spoke to some of this earlier as well too. Just what is explain what the workplace culture is like, and what are the efforts to be more inclusive? And, are there ways that, the sector can adapt to attract more young people? And I know that you not only work in the sector, but you also have a background of working in organizations that connect people to opportunities. So it'd be great to hear your input, Ashley.
Yeah, I appreciate that introduction and the question also. Where do I start? I think the workplace culture, and it was talked about in the earlier panels, I think the workplace culture is just a reconfiguration of what we already live in and what we already do in society, especially when we think about, just connecting people to jobs or just doing regular outreach or just doing general construction, as somebody was talking about in one of the other panels. I think because of that, there's a real flexibility that needs to be displayed for young people coming in. And I think that also needs to be, I think it's something that's already kind of implemented. We all need to be flexible in what we already know. And also in more deeply going into that, there needs to be a lot more communication. I think this conversation is already a big part of that. But I think a big part of the workplace culture, especially for the green economy, because it's so new, is just being able to talk about it freely. And I think empowering young people to share their experience and where they're coming from, and kind of transfer those skills into this new way of doing things that we're trying to do. I think that's very important, and that's something that needs to continue to be emphasized. My time with the Hope program, I think, really brought home this idea of, because they have this huge path of transferable skills. And I think what it did for me was help me to see myself in a construction field. I'm an aspiring art therapist, and I don't think that I ever thought about being a project manager before getting this job with Energy Training Solutions. But the advantage that I think Black and Brown people have of coming from certain communities and being able to tap in to certain levels of communication and levels of understanding, I think it's important to really cultivate that and show the example of how important it is to be able to use that to your advantage. And I think seeing other people that look like you and that have similar experiences than you is a great way of doing that also. So I think this networking thing that we're even doing right now with having this larger conversation is a big part of the workplace culture.
Definitely the network and the representation within the sector, for sure. Thank you. So Allison, I'm going to turn to you, and you have a unique perspective from working within the industry, within management, as well as working with labor. So it would be great for you to speak to the role of labor. What role do the trades play in creating and maintaining pathways into a green economy, and how can we ensure that young people have access to these pathways? And it'd be great for you to tell more of your story and the work that you're doing presently.
Thank you so much. This is a great question, and one that I'm excited to share my experience on. So labor unions have the largest training infrastructure in the United States, second to the military. And there's no one that knows more about how to execute workforce training and job readiness than unions. and they've been doing it for the last 100 years. And I think we'd be hard pressed to find a better model than union apprenticeships. And it's not that I'm biased, because I am a product of union apprenticeship programs. But union apprenticeship programs are a debt-free training program where you're able to earn while you learn. And each year, 170,000 Americans enroll in apprenticeships to learn the trades. And in New York, these are high-paying, family-sustaining careers on the order of 100K a year. And that's plus healthcare and plus benefits like a pension. And this all comes with no prior experience, just a high school diploma. And in today's day and age, where young people are graduating college with no guaranteed work opportunity and crippling student debt, the proposition almost seems just too good to be true. And to be clear, as some of our other panelists said before me, green jobs are jobs in the trades. So the way that I got connected to an apprenticeship program was through Non-Traditional Employment for Women, which is a pre-apprenticeship training program here in New York City that prepares, trains, and places women in careers in skilled construction. And for me, that meant becoming an apprentice with Local 3 IBEW, which is the electricians union. And after I went through my apprenticeship training program and became a journeywoman, and then a sub-foreman, then a foreman, and finally a general foreman, where I was controlling a crew of 50 to 60 electricians, and I got to build my city. And I've worked on all kinds of projects, from working on the tracks of our subway system to rehabilitation of NYCHA housing. I took 3 World Trade Center out of the ground, the Javits Center expansion, and one that I'm particularly proud of is PS62R here in Staten Island, which was the first net zero energy school in the Northeast. And I really can't tell you the immeasurable amount of pride that I have when I can, travel through the city and I see all these projects that I've contributed on. And through being active within my local union and linking with the broader social justice movements and coalition building, specifically around climate change, with coalition groups like Alliance for Greater New York and Climate Jobs. All of that work has led me to my position as the labor relations manager for Ørsted Offshore Wind. And I could have never imagined that when I set foot in News Door so many years ago, that the journey would have led me here. And one of the many reasons that I was so excited for my new position to join the Ørsted organization, aside from really aligning all of my passions and being my dream job, Ørsted truly recognizes organized labor as an important partner in the construction of our projects. So we really appreciate the vital role that unions play in combating inequality in our communities and their unique ability to provide workforce training like the kinds that will prepare local workforce for jobs with the offshore industry. So we know that the offshore wind industry will become a truly important employer in the United States. So as we set out on our mission to create a world that not only runs on green energy, but also creating job opportunities in communities where we work, we have been intentional about involving construction unions early on, and my primary role is developing that relationship. So we believe that good labor practices give us a competitive advantage for recruitment and retention of the clean energy workers of the future, and we're really dedicated to social dialogue with workers and their unions, and together we're identifying joint company and workforce needs to meet the challenges that this new industry presents.
Thank you so much. And so I want to actually, and thank you for speaking about wind in particular too, because I think, it's helpful for folks to think about the breadth of the industry. And so I want to actually turn to a question that's coming in from our audience, and I'll throw it out and, just anyone jump in. So what foundational knowledge, technical and soft skills are most valuable in setting up other young adults in the green economy workforce to succeed? And I'm also thinking about Ashley's point and lifting that up, the importance of like these transferable skills, particularly in an industry that's constantly evolving. So I'll throw that out to you all to just jump in.
I would start off by like the first transferable skill is communication. Like learning how to communicate to different groups of people. That was one of the first things for me is, we call it code switching, a way to sort of know how to communicate in different groups and communicate well to all different groups. Another skill would be problem solving, which most people coming from underserved neighborhoods already have. We just have to find a way to kind of focus it on issues that can benefit us and benefit the community. But I would just say like that problem solving, going into a job, learning that, getting that hands-on training, actually going and teaching people while you're learning things, that actually being able to educate people. But like these trainings like Green City Force, SCAN, Hope, what they give is the experience. A lot of people don't have that experience. So these training programs give us the ability to actually get our hands dirty and do the work. And that gives us those skills just by actually putting us out there. So like time and attendance is one that a lot of people need to get used to, communication, problem solving, critical thinking, how to work as a team, but also how to work when nobody's watching you. Because that's also something, you know, if you're doing a great job, even when no one's watching you, one day the right person's gonna see that and they're gonna wanna add investment. So, you know, giving a good image whenever someone sees you working is always great for the people that come behind you to keep those opportunities coming.
Great. Any other thoughts? I see a second to that.
I kind of feel like that's it. Domingo said a lot of, or I think everything that needs to be said as far as the foundation. But if I had to add one thing, I would say the ability to speak up, one, which is one, the communication, but also speak out, feel like you have the ability to influence what's going on around you. I think sometimes in work environments we don't instill that enough. And I also think God, I forget, maybe it'll come back to me. Thank you, Domingo.
No problem.
Yeah, and I appreciate that point about problem solving because, right, you know, folks come already with the ability to be innovative and creative and solve problems. So that's really important to acknowledge. So we have another question from our audience, and I'll throw this out for everyone. How can we increase awareness and provide shared language to young adults to find value in these types of jobs? Specifically, how can you make the job of a plumber sound significant enough in the context of a green career? And I would just add to that, you know, I think, you know, in my opening remarks, I mentioned just this idea of connecting people to an opportunity, but also really being intentional about like what's the pathway from that, right? So what are the ways in which we can attract folks to the sector and also, you know, be able to explain how significant the work is and what the pathway is?
I can just reinforce kind of my opening remarks and the value of the apprenticeship model in offering a no debt solution to these skills. It's a 5.5-year program for most trades where you earn while you learn, and you come out with the tangible skills that are going to be in demand for green energy jobs. As Daphne pretty eloquently outlines, you know, jobs as installing heat pumps or doing a geothermal solar is plumbing work, and installing solar panels, that's electrical work. And and for offshore wind, there'll be welders, riggers, iron workers, electricians, pile drivers, carpenters. It's just, these are trade jobs. When we talk about green jobs, there is such a huge overlap of trade jobs. And of course, there's also the professional component as well. Like Ashley mentioned, in project management, in researching and doing geotechnical surveys. So there is quite a bit of professional jobs that are tied to this. But when we talk about kind of these jobs in terms of doing the physical work, we're really talking about.
I think your mic went out, Allison.
That's it.
Great, thank you so much. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I think really quickly, I want to add that you have to show people, I think especially young people, the importance of this work to their life. Like, you know, not only is this a career that you can develop on, and these are skills that you can take to another profession if you do ever choose to switch, but this is something that's going to change your environment, your neighborhood. It's going to make things better for the people around you. I think emphasizing those, like, especially for me, someone who has a more wellness mindset than a business mindset, I think it's important to emphasize the the benefit that it's going to have on the whole world, kind of, right? To young people.
Yeah, and I just second Jennifer just shared that comment as well. The idea that, you know, universally having this understanding of climate change and environmental policy and how impactful it is so critical. So we're going to go to another audience question around workers and community ownership. So what strategies for worker and community ownership can we cultivate and support through the growth of green jobs and sustainable solutions for both the planet and people? So what are the types of worker opportunities and ownership opportunities that we can cultivate to grow jobs as well as create sustainable solutions for people?
No? Okay. I would say like actually, so one of the main things to like create jobs in these communities and allow people to start businesses or start these small businesses would be to put them in training programs that not only train them like as a plumber or, you know, as an electrician, but teach them the whole system, like a whole system approach. The plans, the plumber, the management, the funding, they need to know it all in order for them to start these businesses. Otherwise, they're going to start businesses and they're going to go out and try and hire people to do this work for them. And then they're spending money on something that they could have learned in the beginning stages. So I would think like trying to think of a whole system approach, because whenever thinking about construction sustainably, it's a whole system approach. When the architect thinks about things, there's a whole team there. The electrician is there, the plumbers are there, the insulators are there, the bricklayers, like everybody coming together. So I feel like if we want people to be able to run their own businesses, they need to learn it all. And that's like something that I got from like growing up in foster care and getting odd jobs throughout the city, working in NYCHA, going through different job programs my whole life. I learned all those different skills, and you know, I'm one of few, but I feel like if we have more programs like that, like what I'm trying to start, where I'm going to try and teach the people I'm teaching everything. I want you to know everything, every corner. There's no dark spot. There's no gray area. Just invest, educate, and show the people that you're working with that there's no limit to what you would do to get them to raise, you know, even above us, to be better than us in the future.
Amen. So I couldn't second that more. I think that everything you just said. So I'm going to we're almost at time, so I'm going to close it out, and I'd like to hear from each of you. And this is really our call to action for ourselves and for everyone who's participating today in the communities that we live in and serve. So what's one thing everyone joining this event can do right now to tilt the future towards social and economic inclusion for young adults and the green economy? So Ashley, I'll start with you.
Okay, I would say tap into whatever resources you have and start having conversations with the young people around you. See what inspires them, what they like to do. See what you have, what you can offer them, and try to bring it together. Tap into the other people you know that are doing some of the similar things or some similar things and create a network. That's a good start.
Great. Allison?
Yep, so we heard it with the previous panel, and I'll reinforce it. Fill out your census. If you're young people out there listening that aren't registered to vote, register. And if you're a person that cares about climate action and that feel that these are important issues to you in your personal life, you should make that known when you go to the
Great. And Domingo?
I would say like reach out to your community programs, your, you know, community centers, your local Green City Forest, Hope, Scan. Reach out to these offices because most of the time they have a list of resources for young people to, a list of like breadcrumbs for us to chase to make it to our dream career. I stopped using the word job because we really need careers. We don't need something that is temporary. Like in 2009, we got funding and those jobs slowly disappeared. It wasn't like a 10-year plan. We need a plan like for the future. So reach out to your local community members, your local community centers and see what resources are there for you and build on that. Try to add to that. Instead of thinking, how can I learn from them? How can you teach them? Because it's going to take, all of us getting together, working with these organizations to make them better and better and better. Like what's happening with Green City Forest. Every year with a new round of core members, the program gets better and better and better and better until eventually, we have these farms all over the city and people eating fresh produce. So just reach out to your community members, see what information they have. If you have information they don't have, or you can communicate with a certain group of people that aren't interested in communicating with them, be that bridge. So I would just say, try and get the community together by learning what resources are out there and what resources we can actually give.
Great. Thank you all so much. I feel like I can talk to you for hours. It was really great to learn from all of you. And I hope that our audience feels the same. And I can tell from the comments that everyone got a lot out of this session. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sadea, Ashley, Domingo, and Allison. I could have listened to you all day. What sticks with me is this whole idea around transferable skills. I want to welcome back Jennifer, Kathleen, and Lisbeth to closing out the last few minutes of this conversation. I call myself an old school. I've been doing workforce development for a long time, and we've been talking about transferable skills. It wasn't lost in me in this conversation that, from the first panel to this last one, that we need to take a closer look at the skills that folks have now for jobs not be around anymore, and look at how those skills might be transferable to new jobs that are coming online or are currently existing in the green job sector. Lisbeth, Jennifer, Kathleen, what did you hear today? And most importantly, why do you think it's important at this time, and the value of a city strategy around the workforce development sector to develop a green jobs network? Why is that important now?
Thanks, Marjorie. It was important a year ago when we started this conversation. It's so much more important now. I loved what Deputy Mayor Thompson said about it's a question of will, and how he spoke about it takes imagination and it takes creativity. We've been more creative than ever during these challenging times, and really excited that we're here today and that we're launching this network. Come see us on October 27th because the time is now more than ever.
Yeah, I found it, listening to Ashley and Domingo and Allison was so inspiring. And I think they are literally epitomizing the critical need to have holistic workforce programming around green jobs, because they could articulate the skills that are needed, the futures that they envision, and the intersectionality of it all. And so I think they just basically showed why a green sector is so important, and for us to all work together to build it and make sure it's strong. And then so many people articulated today the need to, as Kathleen said, it was important before, but COVID has laid bare inequities that have existed for decades. And we need to build back in ways that are inclusive and are equitable and are taking into account environmental justice and the climate crisis. Because if we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in the same place over and over and over again. So again, the plug is vote, fill out your census, and join us on October 27th.
I could not agree more. And, so much is said today, the breadth of the vision, the leadership that we need, but that we have now, that we have seen on the panels, the need to talk not just about jobs, but about ownership and how we do that. So to me, I just want to build on my colleagues' comments that to me, it's kind of all here. The ingredients for this network, the imperative to come together now, Daphne said previously something that really struck me, which is that we're all learning all the time and together, and we need to come together and iterate around the breadth of this vision and the career paths and the pieces that we all bring to this puzzle, so that we can be building this vision that we need. So I think that the questions, for example, we could go on for hours here, both with our panelists, our speakers, but also answering these questions. But I think this is our hope, that in coming together, we can actually have answers to each other's questions, and then also come up with a collective vision and home for action moving forward.
Yeah, and just to build upon that, Lisbeth, as we saw all the questions that were coming in today, so many of them were so specific, and really showed kind of the hunger for knowledge out here, and how many people, I mean, we had over 400 people that registered for this, this 2-hour convening. And then the questions that came in were really asking for very tactical, on the ground, how do we make this happen? And that's our plan. That was our vision a year ago. And now, like, together, if we can come together and nail this out, it can go from like kind of the theoretical and the vision to this whole community working together to bring green jobs to life in really significant ways across many industries and sectors.
So, ladies, Kathleen, Lisbeth, Jan, I want to thank you for your vision and your commitment and dedication to making this happen. And I know that folks think about this as, well, you spent an entire year doing this, because we joke around it. Change takes time to happen, and commitment, with all the work that we all do and our everyday commitment, committing to this bigger idea and bigger vision for how we can build an inclusive economy. You've helped us with our thinking around it, and you certainly have educated the JobsFirst team about this. So I want to thank you, and I look forward to our next conversation on the October 27. If you're an employer, a policy maker, a nonprofit, a philanthropic investor, government, a regular citizen, if you want to join us for this conversation and to build a green sector network for New York City, please join us on the 27th. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to the next time. Bye-bye.